The first shovel of dirt hit the casket with a hollow thud, a sound that should have broken my heart. Instead, it sounded like freedom. I stood at the edge of the grave, my hands deep in the pockets of a cheap black coat I had bought from a thrift store an hour ago. Around me, a dozen people stood with their heads bowed, pretending to mourn the passing of Arthur and Martha Halloway. They whispered about what a tragedy it was, a house fire that took them both in the middle of the night. They spoke of Arthur's dedication to the community and Martha's gentle spirit. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to laugh until my ribs cracked and the sound echoed through the entire cemetery. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the polished wood of the coffin, knowing that the monsters inside could never hurt me again. My name is Elias Thorne. I was 6 years old when the system handed me over to the Halloways. I was 30 when I finally came back to bury them. And in between those years, I lived a life that wasn't a life at all. It was a sentence. The Halloways didn't own a farm like the people in the stories you usually hear. They owned a scrap metal yard in the rusted heart of Detroit. It was a graveyard of twisted steel, broken engines, and jagged iron. And I was the gravedigger. Arthur Halloway was a giant of a man, smelling permanently of grease and stale tobacco. He didn't want a son. He wanted a machine that didn't need fuel. On my first day, he didn't show me my room. He walked me out to a mountain of copper wire entangled with rubber insulation. He handed me a rusted stripping knife and said, "Clean it all. If you finish before sunset, you get dinner. If you don't, you drink water." I was 6. I cut my fingers until they bled. I cried until my throat was raw. But by sunset, the pile wasn't finished. That night, I learned that Arthur Halloway didn't make idle threats. I went to bed with a stomach that twisted in knots, listening to Arthur and Martha eating roast beef in the kitchen below. My bedroom was a converted storage closet in the basement. It had concrete walls, a single mattress on the floor, and a small window near the ceiling that let in the gray light of the alleyway. In the winter, frost would form on the inside of the glass. I learned to sleep curled in a tight ball, wrapping my limbs around myself to preserve heat. Martha was worse than Arthur. Arthur was physically cruel, but Martha was psychological. She would buy toys, shiny red trucks, action figures, board games, and leave them in their boxes on the kitchen table. She would tell the neighbors she bought them for me. But the moment the door closed, she would lock them in a glass cabinet. "These are for good boys," she would whisper, her voice like cracking ice. "And you, Elias, are bad blood. You come from nothing, so you deserve nothing." For 18 years, I was their slave. I didn't go to football games. I didn't go to prom. I went to school because the law required it, but the moment the final bell rang, I ran home. If I was 5 minutes late, I slept in the scrapyard inside the rusted shell of an old sedan. I learned to be invisible. I learned that speaking only gave them a reason to be angry. So, I became a ghost. I stripped copper, I crushed cans, I sorted steel from aluminum until my hands were calloused and stained permanently gray. But I also learned something else. I learned how things worked. Surrounded by broken engines and discarded machines, I started to understand them. While Arthur was passed out drunk and Martha was watching television, would sneak into the shed with a flashlight. I took apart lawnmower engines and put them back together. I fixed broken alternators. I learned the language of mechanics because machines made sense. Machines didn't hate you. If a machine was broken, there was a reason, and if you were smart enough, you could fix it. I realized that the Halloways were stupid. They sold valuable parts as scrap because they didn't know what they were. I started fixing the trash they threw away. I hid a stash of repaired alternators and starters under the floorboards of the basement. When I turned 18, the state checks stopped coming. I expected them to kick me out. Instead, Arthur tossed a pair of heavy work boots at me. "You owe us," he growled. "For the food, for the roof. You work for free until I say the debt is paid." I stayed. Not out of loyalty, but out of fear. They had beaten the spirit out of me so thoroughly that the idea of the outside world was terrifying. I stayed for 4 more years. The day I left wasn't planned. It was a Tuesday. It was freezing cold, the kind of cold that hurts your bones. Arthur was screaming at me because a crane had jammed. He was red-faced, spitting insults, raising his hand to strike me like he had 1,000 times before. But this time, as I looked at the jammed crane, I realized something. It wasn't just stuck. A hydraulic line had burst. It was a simple fix, but Arthur was too blind with rage to see it. He swung his fist. I caught it. The silence that followed was louder than the machinery. Arthur looked at his hand, then at me, his eyes wide with shock. I was taller than him now. Stronger. Years of hauling steel had turned my body into iron. "I fixed the crane," I said, my voice calm, sounding strange to my own ears. "But I'm not going to operate it." I shoved his hand away. I walked to the basement, grabbed a duffel bag, and took the $300 I had made selling fixed parts to a local mechanic on the sly. "You walk out that gate, you die in the gutter." Martha shrieked from the porch. "You're garbage, Elias. You're nothing without us." I didn't look back. I walked out of the scrapyard, the heavy metal gate clanging shut behind me. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The next 8 years were a blur of work. I didn't die in the gutter. I thrived. I walked into a mechanic shop 3 towns over and asked for a broom. Within 6 months, I was a lead mechanic. Within 3 years, I owned my own shop. Within 5, I owned 3 shops and a recycling plant that put the Holloway's scrapyard to shame. I worked 18 hours a day. I didn't date. I didn't take vacations. I built an empire of solitude. I bought a house with a heated floor and a kitchen full of food that I never ate. I was successful, but I was hollow. I was a rich man with a poor boy's soul, waiting for someone to tell me I wasn't allowed to have any of it. Then came the call. The fire. The funeral. And now, here I was. The service ended. The crowd dispersed quickly, the cold wind chasing them to their cars. I was the last one left. "Mr. Thorne?" The voice was deep, smooth, and commanded attention. I turned around. Standing on the paved path was a man who looked like he owned the air he breathed. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first shop. He was holding a black umbrella, though it wasn't raining anymore. Beside him stood a massive bodyguard with sunglasses. "I'm Thorne," I said, wary. "Who are you? A creditor?" They didn't leave anything but ash. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I am not here for Arthur or Martha Holloway. I am here for you." He stepped closer. He was older, maybe 70, but he stood with a military straightness. "My name is Victor Sterling. I am the executor of the Holloway estate." I frowned. Estate? They had a failing scrapyard and a mortgaged house. "That is what they had," Victor said. "But that is not what they were paid." I froze. "Paid? What are you talking about?" Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick leather envelope. "Elias, did you never wonder why the state placed you with them? There were 12 other families on the list. Nice families. Families with big backyards and golden retrievers. But you went to the Halloways. A couple with criminal records for petty theft and a history of violence. Did you never ask why? The system is broken, I said, my voice tightening. The system is corruptible, Victor corrected. And it was bought. He handed me the envelope. Open it. I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a single document. A contract. Dated 28 years ago. It was a contract between Arthur Halloway and a holding company I had never heard of, Apex Dynamics. The terms were simple. Arthur and Martha Halloway were to be paid a monthly stipend of $5,000, a fortune back then, to take custody of a boy. But there were conditions. Asterisk Condition 1, no affection, asterisk. Asterisk Condition 2, maximum labor, asterisk. Asterisk Condition 3, no luxury, no comfort, no assistance, asterisk. Asterisk Condition 4, the subject must be broken, or he must be forged, asterisk. My hands shook. The paper rattled in the wind. This is sick. They were paid to torture me? They were paid to test you, Victor said. Turn the page. I flipped the page. There was a signature at the bottom of the funding request. The man who paid for the torture. The man who designed my hell. Asterisk Magnus Thorne, asterisk. The name hit me like a sledgehammer. Thorne. My last name. The name on my birth certificate that I thought was just a random assignment by the state. Magnus Thorne is a billionaire, I whispered. Everyone knew the name. He was an industrial tycoon. Steel, shipping, aerospace. He was the wealthiest man on the eastern seaboard. Magnus Thorne is your father, Victor said. The world tilted. I felt bile rise in my throat. My father? My father did this? He paid people to starve me? To work me like a mule? He didn't want a son who was soft, Victor said, his voice devoid of sympathy. Magnus believes that greatness is not born, it is forged in fire. He believes that comfort creates weakness. He wanted an heir who understood the value of steel, of hunger, of absolute self-reliance. He abandoned you to the wolves to see if you would lead the pack or be eaten. Victor gestured to a black limousine waiting at the cemetery gates. He has been watching. Every year. When you fixed that crane, he watched. When you walked out, he cheered. When you built your own company from nothing, he knew you were ready. Ready for what? I spat, crushing the paper in my fist. To take your place. He is dying, Elias. The empire needs an emperor. He wants to meet you. Today. I stared at the limousine. A fury unlike anything I had ever felt burned in my chest. It was hotter than the anger I felt toward Arthur. Arthur was just a brute. This was a calculation. My entire life, every scar on my hands, every night I cried myself to sleep, every moment of loneliness, it was an experiment. He wants to give you everything, Victor urged. Billions of dollars. Power. A legacy. I looked at the grave of the Halloways. Then I looked at the limousine. I walked toward the car. Victor smiled and opened the door for me. I slid into the leather seat. The drive took 2 hours. We arrived at a massive estate on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was a palace of glass and steel, cold and imposing. I was led into a room that looked like a king's study. Sitting in a wheelchair by the window was a man who looked exactly like me, only withered. Magnus Thorne. He turned. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and cruel. Elias, he rasped. You look strong. I didn't sit down. I stood over him. You did it. You admit it? I created you, Magnus said, a twisted pride in his voice. Look at you. You built a business with nothing but your hands and your brain. If I had raised you here, with maids and private tutors, you would be soft. You would be useless. I gave you the greatest gift a father can give. I gave you the drive to survive. He wheeled himself closer. And now, it is all yours. The company. The money. The fleet. Sign the papers, and you become the most powerful man in the state. He pushed a pen toward me. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the old man. He expected gratitude. He expected me to be impressed by his genius. I picked up the pen. Magnus smiled. I knew you were smart, he said. I am smart, I replied. I'm smart enough to know a broken machine when I see one. I didn't sign the paper. Instead, I took the contract, the one from the cemetery, and laid it on his desk. You think you forged me, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You think you made me strong. But you didn't. You just made me hate. And you made a mistake, old man. What mistake? Magnus scowled. You taught me that connections are weaknesses. You taught me that loyalty doesn't exist. You taught me to destroy anyone who stands in my way. I snapped the expensive pen in half. Ink bled onto his pristine desk. I don't want your money. I don't want your name. I have my own company. And you know what? I know your business, Magnus. I know you use the same suppliers I do. I know your shipping routes. I know your margins. I leaned down so my face was inches from his. I'm not going to inherit your empire. I'm going to dismantle it. I'm going to use the skills you forced me to learn, the ruthlessness you paid the Halloways to teach me, and I am going to run you out of business. I will buy your company for pennies when you are bankrupt. Fear, genuine fear, flickered in his eyes for the first time. You can't. You're my son. I'm not your son, I said, straightening up and buttoning my coat. I'm the competition. I turned and walked to the door. Elias, he screamed behind me. Come back. You need me. I stopped at the doorway. I looked back at the sad, dying man in his lonely castle. I needed a father when I was 6, I said. Now, I don't need anything. I walked out of the mansion and into the cold air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway. I had a long walk back to the main road, but I didn't mind. For the first time in 30 years, the cold didn't bother me at all. I was made of iron, and I had work to do.